All right, we're going to bring in Tomris from the USA. Pronouns are whatever. So let's see how she does. Tomris wants to know about if someone's gender is determined by how they identify. Tomris,
Hello,
you are
can you hear me?
live with Arden and Lux. Yep, we can hear you. What's going on?
Hey, what's going on? How are you?
Doing all right. Talk to
So
us.
the question's pretty self-explanatory. In your opinion, is someone's gender informed by how they identify?
Is it informed by how they identify? Certainly. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So you would say that someone who identifies as a man would be a man, and someone who identifies as a woman would be a woman?
Generally speaking, I do hesitate because sometimes people who are not engaged in this conversation, when they use the word identify, think that it is the mere statement at any point in time that is what we're talking about. Whereas when I think Lux and I talk about identify, we're talking about like sincerely holding a sense about your sense of self. So if that helps clarify, then yes.
Yeah, no, it does. I would just say that I guess the point of contention I would have with that is I think I'm not one of these people who's going to say that sex and gender are like the same thing and that your gender just boils down to like what your anatomy is or something. I think it is more nuanced than that. My problem is that your seeing as gender is social. I would say that your gender comes down to how you are perceived by the society that you live in. So for example, if I identify as, let's say I identify as a woman, right? But I operate in society as a man. Everyone who sees me identifies me as a man. Like, for all intents and purposes, anyone who interacts with me, I'm a man. It doesn't follow that I'm a woman just because I feel like one or identify as one. You know what I mean?
I mean, what you've stumbled on here is actually some pretty high level gender philosophy, which is that, like, yeah, it is a question of like, at what point do you become a woman? If it is it something that's conferred on you by the community, which to some degree it may be. Like Judith Butler is on it with the performative theory. That gender is something that you are, or rather, it is something you do. But like, if you're taking I guess like a more zoomed out view that appreciates the nuance, then you will understand that they are all factors of that. These are all different factors that constitute being when we are talking about gender. Like, to be gender on one hand is what you identify as and like how you personally feel about yourself. And in another facet of this complicated thing, performative theory is something that dominates our lives in the way that like money dominates our lives, and it's like inescapable in that sense. And like the act of becoming is something that I think everybody goes through. This is actually, spoiler alert, going to be the crux of my Mulan video, but everybody goes through a gender transition, whether it's from boyhood to manhood, girlhood to womanhood,
Sure.
from boyhood into womanhood, or from like I'm a man now and now I'm in womanhood zone. Like there's an ongoing kind of becoming, and to some degree, I will say yes, I agree that like the acknowledgement of your gender, like the common acknowledgement of your gender, is predicated on some amount of outward transition or outward indication of becoming, is another way to philosophical jack off way to put it, I guess. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like, I don't disagree with your premise. I just disagree with what commonly follows, which is that people who haven't sufficiently transitioned don't deserve recognition of that true and deeply impactful internal reality. Like that, the issue that I take is that these are placed in conflict with one another when I see them as like deeply interwoven concepts, and that like, okay, just because somebody is early in their process doesn't mean that that reality is like less real. If it's nice when it's easy to tell what somebody's gender is, like by their presentation and everything, but to some extent, people don't have control over that. You can be on hormones for a long time and have it not be able to change some things that got solidified earlier in your life, or maybe you have a conflicting medical problem that means if you take the hormones, then your risk of cardiovascular disease becomes unacceptably high or something. Like, so yeah, that's the issue that I take, is when those two things are placed in contention with one another, as opposed to being seen as like a complex, interwoven set of circumstances.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's just kind of, I guess the counter I would have to that is that, for example, for being a man, right? I would look at someone who is biologically, born with the male anatomy, identifies as a man, wears male clothes, does everything as far as we're aware that like a quote unquote man would do. But they lie to people and they're a coward and they disrespect women and stuff like that. I don't care how that person identifies. If they do those things, they're not a man. And that doesn't come down to how they identify. That doesn't come down to how they feel. That comes down to how they present themselves in the world. You know what I mean? So I would look at the same thing for a woman and be like, just regardless of what your biology says, if you do not resemble a woman, that you're not a woman. You know what I mean? And I'm not just saying
Interesting that you
don't
contrasted
look like a woman,
those
but, like,
two different things. I want to give Arden a second here, but you just presented a bunch of like behaviors and characteristics for men, and then presented looking like a woman as the only qualifier for being a woman in this criteria.
No,
I was almost on board. I was almost on board with like the idea that being an honorable man is tied into our idea of being a man. I was going to agree with you, but then you said something ridiculous. Now, Arden, I want to give you a chance to jump in.
Yeah, I think
you're misunderstanding. You go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was just going to say what I think I see as the issue here is that gender has multiple use cases, like linguistically, and they are often overlapping in a lot of ways, but there are some ways in where they're distinctive. Like, we use gender sometimes to refer to gender identity, which is like very specifically that sort of psychological state of believing that you are a woman or a man or non-binary or whatever. But we also use gender to refer to like the roles in society. And there's a lot of overlap there, but they're also not perfectly two circles on top of each other, right? And so I think that's kind of where I see a lot of this issue is it's like, I completely agree with all this stuff about performance theory. Like this is why I've often said, I don't really care if somebody thinks I'm a man or if they don't think I'm ontologically a woman or like really a woman or whatever. Because like when I go out in society, like I've told the story all the time about when I'm going to Tractor Supply to get animal bedding for my animals, the worker comes out and is like, "I've got it, ma'am," and lifts this 40-pound bag for me. I'm like, it's a 40-pound bag. I'm 29. I think I'm able-bodied. I think I can handle it. It's not a big deal. But they treat me like a woman in society, right? Like other business owners will only look at my partner and talk to him like he's the obvious business owner when I am in fact the owner of the business and the one who runs that side of things. So like regardless of whether or not I'm really a woman, like society treats me like a woman, right? I completely agree with all of that. But also before I transitioned, before society saw me as a woman, my experience of my gender identity was the exact same. And so I think what trans advocates are trying to say here is like, we understand how society views this whole project, this whole like interface of socializing. And we're trying to say that like, let's maybe be gentle and not so forthright in our assumptions, because some people don't always match those assumptions and they also deserve to be treated with dignity when they're operating in society. And you can't really point to like a risk of violence or anything like that because there's no real evidence that there's any statistical risk of violence. And overwhelmingly, the people who commit violence are the people who know the victim personally, right? So it's not just going to be some strange trans girl who doesn't pass pissing in the stall next to you. It's going to be like your Uncle Jim or someone like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's really this interplay, in my opinion, of these different uses of gender and the way that they overlap and kind of using the space where they overlap to say that it's really the one over here and not the circle over here. And it's like, well, no, it's all of it, right? All of these things matter.
Yeah, I want to respond to what Luxander said a second ago, because I think you misunderstood what I was saying, that to be characterized as a woman is rough. I would say it's roughly as what's the word I'm looking for? It's roughly as intensive as someone categorizing as a man. So for example, and I guess this might be a little contentious, but I would look at a quote unquote woman who is, again, biologically female, all this stuff, right? Who takes absolutely no pride in how she presents herself to other people and like has absolutely none of the social norms that we would expect women to execute. I would not call that person a woman. I would call them a biological female. I would call them like, they as far as that, but like just because that person identifies as a woman, if they do not operate in society as a woman, then they
I
are not
think
a woman.
what
Go ahead.
we're doing right now is opening a much bigger can of worms than just the transgender issue.
Mhm.
Because what you're doing here is like, okay, I want to like kind of reiterate to you what I've heard you say about like what makes I'm going to go ahead and say what makes a good man or woman in that kind of honorable context. Like I'm putting myself in a little bit of like a Game of Thrones medieval zone, right? Where I'm like, okay, what makes a good man? Okay, a man like protects his family, he's honorable, whatever. Like he's an upstanding citizen, however you want to define that. Okay. And then so that's what your kind of general vibe is, what I'm receiving about like what constitutes a man as the way that you're defining it. Like a biological male is distinct from a man. Maybe in the way that some people would say like a dad is different than a father, whatever, like, the social role is different from being the sperm donor. And then for women, you're like the criteria that I am describing for what makes a woman in that same sense of like, she's a good woman. She's performing her womanly role. She may be biologically female, but does she actually deserve this, this title that is conferred upon her by how she behaves? And the criteria that you've given is like pretty or like puts effort into her appearance. So the can of worms that I'm discovering here is that you associate manhood and womanhood with like sexist stereotypes in the way that we are often accused of upholding sexist stereotypes. Whereas I actually believe that if a woman looks kind of trashy and she hasn't gotten out of bed in 4 days, like I think that she's still a woman because woman is like a complex psychosocial phenomenon, really, that includes how you perceive yourself and is not anything to do with reaching arbitrary gender binary sexist standards of behavior, and certainly doesn't uphold the idea that the core thing about being a good woman or being a woman is putting effort into your appearance. Like that's the stumbling block that we're having right now.
Yeah, well, it depends on the society that we're talking about, and if you're like for myself, and I think for most people, if you're without them giving you their like pronouns or telling you what gender they're or anything, when you observe someone for the first time, right, and you're seeing are they a man, are they a woman, are they whatever, right? You're not necessarily consciously going through, are they making an effort to appear, pretty or something? Are they like, are they taking, you're not looking at that. It's just they look like a woman, they look like a man. It's like intuitive, it's instant. It's like
it's a pattern matching
something
software that is running on our brains all the time. Sure.
Yeah, and I'm saying that's when we talk about men and we talk about women, and like it can be different in certain circumstances, right? Like for example, if I'm a military recruiter, when I say I have 100 men at my disposal, I'm not saying I have 100 biological men or biological males that like are that don't lie and aren't cowards. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that
Are you on the web caller? Your audio just dropped. Yeah, you're gonna have to pull your phone away, tap it, wake it up, and bring it back.
Gosh darn web caller.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. If your phone goes to sleep, if it goes dark, the screen turns off, we can't hear you anymore. So you gotta tap your phone, open it back up. Oh man, this is actually an interesting conversation, and you aren't hostile, which makes me want to continue taking this topic. So I'm like,
yeah,
I want to reward good behavior while disagreeing. Hello, Tomris. Okay, well,
sad.
Yep, I can't have the dead air, Tomris. So you can try calling in, and maybe we'll try to get you back in. Although we are going to be closing the lines here relatively soon. We still have some open space, so we'll try to keep it going. All I wanted to add on to that was, I think this is the direction you were going, Lux, but correct me if I'm wrong, was when we start to unpack what exactly is taking care of themselves, I think we're going to unveil a probably Eurocentric sort of white supremacist standard of expectation for what that looks like, right? And I think that's where a lot of feminists have been that, are well, maybe not all of them went down the pro-trans route, but many of them did, about like, kind of, this is the whole point of like what being a woman is, when you really pin it down, has no like single identifiable characteristic that includes everyone and excludes everyone, as they're supposed to. And like, I definitely is also a weird thing there, because what Tomris was talking about, I would agree that is probably largely how society operates. But I think the discussion we're usually having here is this how society should operate? Like, we're kind of having a moral, ethical discussion about contrasting what we do with what we ought to do, what is going to make people's lives better, what is going to improve equity between people. I don't disagree that we live in a sexist society that expects women to look a certain way. Like, very obviously we do, but what I have a problem with is whether or not we should be operating that way, right? Yeah, no, that was a good conversation though, and I would be interested in. Oh, he's back. He's back.
He's back. Okay.
Hello.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if you heard any of that.
I heard some of it. My internet went out. I'm not sure how much of my monologue you heard, but
not much.
Yeah,
it was right after you got started that it went out. So
okay, yeah. I mean, I guess my whole thesis was that at no point is your gender tied to how you feel. So I don't really. I still haven't really been convinced that that's a good way to
see. But you're saying at no point, but yet you agree that gender identity is like a. When I went through that whole thing about the overlapping circles, you said you agree with all that, and then you went on to describe how society operates. But so it seems like it's weird to me that you could say you don't think it has anything to do with how you feel, and having said you agreed with what I said earlier.
It's not determined. Like, there's a strong overlap with how you feel, but that's not what determines it.
Sure, but to say that it has nothing to do with how you feel, then that would be incorrect, right? Like, nobody here, we've been saying this on Taka since the beginning, that I don't think gender and sex are orthogonal. They're not unrelated. They clearly have a lot of overlap, a lot of influence on each other, right? Like, but to say that there's no relationship there, I think that would be radical and not substantiated. I think you're.
I don't think I was. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say it's a very complex like interweaving of how you have internalized social expectations and what the gender roles in your society are, and how you feel and how you want to communicate that to others. It is a massive web of like psychosocial and biological like diathesis, right? These sort of like predispositions that's coming together to create this result.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I started. My initial question was, does your identity determine your gender? And my whole point is that, like, you're right that it does have a strong relationship with it. It's just when we determine, at least as far as like orthodoxy in the English language goes, as when we determine if someone's a man or a woman, like there's a bunch of different characteristics that go into it, but none of those characteristics are how they feel. Like that's not what determines it. You know what I mean? Like, I think what you're saying is that if you identify as a man or you identify as a woman, you're going to make choices that like align with these like markers that we've determined as a society. It's just that's like you adhering to the markers is what makes you a man or a woman. It's not the feeling. The feeling is what catalyzes it, but that's not like you know what I'm saying?
Well, okay, so I'm just like trying to understand your perspective, Tomris. Like, genuinely, like. Do you, okay, I want to present to you a hypothetical and to try to like understand what it is that you believe. So let's say there's a female who works at an automotive shop and she has super short hair and she dates women. And she has grit and grime under her nails and she's wearing a frumpy, you know what mechanics wear, those frumpy ass button down shirts.
Sure.
Not making an attempt to be feminine or attractive or particularly upkeep her appearance. Is that person a woman for you?
It depends. If they resemble a woman, as in like they can go back to like bone structure and stuff like that, right? If they clearly are a woman based on like their physical characteristics, right?
Okay,
like
but these are contradictory criteria.
Yeah.
Like, you have presented one position where you've said you are a woman because of how you behave. I have now presented to you a female who does nothing that is typical for how a female should behave and be considered a woman, right? She doesn't even date men, this woman. And like for you to now you've shifted the goalposts to now say, well, actually, if her fucking cheekbones are high enough, then sure, I'll consider her a woman. Like, so you have just contradicted yourself, and you are either going to have to now choose one of those two criteria and stick to it, or you're going to acknowledge that gender is multifaceted and has to do with a complex, interrelated web of features that include behavior and biology and probably identity to some degree.
No, I didn't contradict myself. It's both of those things. It is both how you behave and it is what you look like. Those both go into whether you're a man or a woman, right? What I'm saying is that if there's a man who's like looks like a man and presents as a man and acts like a man, like.
But if you only have to fit one of those criteria, like, so the woman that I've described, you're like, yes, she's a woman because of her biology and how she appears, and even if she doesn't do all these other things. So is a trans woman who is doing all of the feminine behaviors but still has some lingering bone structure of a masculine jawline, is that person a woman?
If the remaining feature is such that I can tell that they were born, or I can tell that they're a dude from how they look, then yeah, they're a dude.
So can I offer a real world example that is controversial in this exact way? What about, do you know the actress Dot-Marie Jones?
Do I know who? Sorry.
An actress, Dot-Marie Jones. She famously played Coach Beast on Glee, who was a trans man in the show. This is a cisgender woman. She has very broad shoulders. She's very tall, very masculine facial structure. Her whole presentation is that she's a very like kind of masculine woman, right? So what are the features remaining that you're looking for in this individual that would indicate to you, this is a woman? Does it come down to she's got tits and a vajayjay?
Yeah, so I looked up the person, and I definitely, this is a good example because in all of these pictures that I'm looking at, except for like things that she's clearly in like a TV show or something, she's wearing women's clothing. I can see I can see her breasts like protruding, so like I can see that that's part of her biology, and she just like her facial features and stuff, like she looks like I guess more masculine than the average woman would. Like she clearly like resembles a woman in my opinion, so I would refer to her as a woman.
I find it interesting that you went to wearing women's clothing, but also so much of this is what you look like. And I think there's so much to unpack on what that even means, what you look like, because also there are going to be so much variation between groups about how like females and males tend to look like in a given culture. So I think it's not a particularly reliable. And I also, again, want to come back to, like a few minutes ago, you said that like none of these things are about how you feel, but that was right after you would agree that how you feel was a part of it. So it's clearly not none of these things are how you feel. That's clearly some part of this. It seems to me like you're trying to have your cake and eat it too. Like you want it both ways, that it isn't about biology, but also that when all the chips are down, it's still about biology. When we can't pin down anything else, it still will always come back to biology.
It's a social performance, except when I decide that it's actually biological essentialism. I'm fucking mad right now, actually.
I don't see how what I'm saying is contradictory. I'm saying it's both based on your innate biological characteristics, and it is also based on how you perform. And at the end of, and like I think where I think you're misunderstanding me is that your appearance is largely dictated by how you perform, right? Insofar as you can do things to change the appearance of your face. And I'm saying that if someone who is born like biologically as a male, right, if they do things to their physical appearance such that I cannot tell that they are biologically male, and I like look at them, and as far as I can tell, they're a woman. They're a woman. Like there's no like it's not like they like I'm gonna ask to see like their like genitals or something. Like that's ridiculous, right?
I think that's also not a really reliable criteria, because there's an Instagram influencer I follow who's a drag queen, who started becoming a drag queen because outside of drag, he looks like a woman. And he was like, I have been blessed with super feminine features everywhere I go my whole life. Everyone assumes I'm a woman. When I go on a plane, I get mammed. When I try to go into the men's restroom at the airport, people look at me weird and they double take that they're in the right room. And they regularly present themselves in women's clothing with women's body proportions, you know, with like hip pads and breast pads and all this stuff. So like by this criteria, this person is a woman just because on a glance you saw they were a woman, but very obviously this person is a man and would tell you that even when they're in drag, I am a man. Even when he's not in drag and everyone still thinks he's a woman, he would tell you I'm not a woman. So like clearly this is not actually a reliable criteria for determining who is a man and woman. Perhaps reliable, but not completely, right? Like it's like a ruler whose inch is 1 inch off. And so, sure, in knowing that, you can kind of account for that when you're measuring stuff and make it all relative. But clearly, the measuring tool has a major flaw that could lead into some serious issues, right? Whereas we're proposing a tool that doesn't have that same flaw.
Yeah, so two things. Number one, I forget if it was you or if it was Luxander who said that one of the issues with this is that the subjective metrics of what makes someone a man or a woman is different from like group to group and culture to culture. And like that's exactly the point, is that like if you go to like China right now, for example, I'm sure that there's different expectations as far as like, remember when I said that like a man is someone who like doesn't lie and isn't a coward and all this stuff. I'm sure if you go to China, there will be different expectations that just aren't really applicable to our culture that like men and women will have to fit into. And like that's their culture. This is ours. You know what I mean? But number two,
I think part of the point that Arden was trying to make is that our heuristic doesn't change from culture to culture, which makes it more reliable. But please continue.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think, but with what you were saying about your friend, I don't know if there was someone you know or someone you follow, but like,
no, I don't.
With the person who like is, I guess, biologically male, but like, I guess resembles a woman, and like people think they're a woman when they like. Until they open their passport, right, and you see the little M, right, and you see that they have a man's name. Until that happens, they're a woman. Like as far as anyone's concerned, they're a woman.
I disagree,
right? Because they get treated as a woman. They get
this individual was always a man. I completely disagree. I think this is a very, very flawed system. That's why what we're proposing, I think, is so vastly superior, because it both accounts for all of these like social expectations and social trends, but also it accounts for the times where those social expectations and trends fail. Right? We both acknowledge that, sure, the majority of time when I see somebody who looks like a standard biological female operating in society, engaging in women's roles, I am probably going to also assume they're a woman. But the difference is if they tell me, actually, I'm not a biological woman, I'm a man, I can go, oh, cool, nice to know. Now I have my categorizations set correctly. Like it seems like the categorization system you're suggesting is just so fluid, and not in the way that is like respecting the diversity of genders, but in that it can be whatever you want when you want it to be. Whereas I think what we're proposing is a system that allows you to categorize people accurately 100% of the time. That way, somebody who's a woman in China isn't a man in the US or vice versa. They're a woman no matter where they go, even if they don't necessarily fit the social expectations of the given culture they're in. That seems like a extremely flawed way to go about categorizing that element of people's identity.
Like the real world impact of this is basically like something that people feel is an intrinsic part of their humanity is subject to literally change on a per interaction basis. Like in my situation, like there have been times where I have been very overtly androgynous in my appearance. My voice is still very androgynous, whatever. If I'm wearing a mask and a hoodie, which I often do in public, you probably wouldn't be able to clearly identify any sex characteristics that I may have. So if I'm being gendered as a man and then a woman in this interaction and then the next interaction, like when I used to work retail and I had to talk to dozens or hundreds of people a day, is like that is a really destabilizing way to organize society, especially when we're like reflecting, again, something that many people is an intrinsic aspect of their humanity. I'm not saying that it isn't something that is kind of practically happening, that like, yeah, like I'm either being subjected to misogyny or granted the privilege of being male in like one interaction to the next. But that doesn't mean that like literally what I am is changing minute to minute. Like, I mean, I guess what you believe in, Tomris, is like an extreme version of gender fluidity that would put you on the extreme fringe of the most extreme trans people. Or like that you believe that almost every single person is non-binary and there are only like 5 real men and women in the world who adhere to the standards of being biologically and behaviorally in line with their expected gender roles. Like, I don't really know that you even understand what it is that you're saying.
I mean, I feel like I do. Just like, I hate to keep using hypotheticals, but I mean, it's the best way to illustrate points. That if I put out a fire once, like once in my life, I took out a fire extinguisher and I put out a fire, right? I'm not a firefighter, but I put out a fire once. And if I go around telling people, and if I genuinely believe, like in my soul, right, that I'm a firefighter, even though I'm not part of a fire department, and I've only put out a fire like 6 years ago on this one like random occasion, like me identifying as a firefighter and even me putting out a fire at some point does not make me a firefighter. It's the fact that the general consensus among society is that in order to be a firefighter, you have to go around in a red truck and be part of a fire department and like do all this stuff, right?
Well, I actually was gonna say something
like
about this earlier.
And I'll get like yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I think becoming is an interesting concept, right? So I really want to start hiking, okay? And so I am not yet at a stage where I can like go for a long hike because my health doesn't allow it, right? But I am in the process of acquiring new gear. I am in the process of training physically so that I can go on hikes. Like at some point, I'm going to be a hiker. And like maybe right now it would be more accurate to describe myself as like a hiker in training or like an amateur hiker or something like that, right? But like my identity as a hiker or as someone who wants to be a hiker is influential on my life and on my behaviors and is a factor, and actually a really important factor in my becoming of whatever it is I'm going to become next. The goal is to be a hiker. Maybe I'll get back into strength training or some other form of exercise. Maybe I'll get into like some insane kind of rock climbing, but like that identity as like a burgeoning whatever it is important, is tangible and influential. So it's like the same kind of thing. I'm trying to extract it away from the gender thing a little bit. But like my identity as a gender is a real factor of the world that impacts me and influences me and creates physical change in the world. Even the act of saying I identify with the gender that is different than the one I was assigned is a transgressive act and represents part of the total sum of behaviors that we are saying are related to how you are gendered and like whether that is given validity in the world. Like it just so happens that I put a pretty big weight on that behavior of statement, that behavior of outwardly identifying. Like I just happen to consider that a much more significant factor in honoring or identifying someone's gender than these other physical factors. And like, again, yes, I will reflexively see men and women in my life. And then I might learn, oh, that's actually a non-binary person. Like I would have swore they were a woman.
Yeah.
But they're telling me that is the most important factor for me.
I also, just before we let you respond, Tomris, so sorry, I want to add one thing and then we'll let you respond. And then we probably got to move on because we do have other calls waiting, but this has been a good conversation. I definitely invite you to call back. If you've ever read the book Catch Me If You Can by Frank Abagnale Jr., there's also a musical named after it. It's essentially about this person who he's a con artist. He lies about who he is. He hides his identity, and he finds himself ending up being a pilot at a major airline, driving planes for a while, not getting caught, flying from port to port. And because he like came off the airplane and was presumed to be a pilot, he was able to kind of get himself some pseudo realistic like paperwork to even affirm it. And it was after like, I think even maybe multiple years, but I may be wrong on that. It's based on a real story of doing this. He eventually got caught. it sounds like to me, according to your understanding of gender and identity, that he would have literally been a pilot in all those instances. But I think everyone who reads the book, watches the movie, or watches the musical unanimously agrees he was never a pilot. He was pretending to be a pilot, right? He was performing pilot things, sure. And like with your example of the firefighter, somebody who puts out fires and drives the big red truck, I don't think is necessarily a firefighter. A firefighter is somebody who has worked to be a firefighter, has gotten the credentials to be a firefighter, and has been officially deemed a firefighter, right? Like it's not simply the act of doing always. And I think in some cases it can be, but I don't think in all cases. I think it's almost like you're taking some situations where that does kind of apply and extrapolating it out. But yeah, anyway, I would love to give you a chance to give your last thoughts and then we'll wrap up. But again, I do invite you to call back because this was a good conversation.
Yeah, no, so just two things. Number one, to the pilot thing, I absolutely, he wouldn't be a certified pilot. He wouldn't be a legal pilot. No, a pilot is someone who flies planes. So as far as I'm concerned, he would be a pilot. And I think, going back to what Luxander was saying, excuse me, about hiking, I would not, you're not a hiker. No offense, because you're not a hiker. When you start going for hikes, if you open that up by saying that you're training to go for hikes and you're doing all this stuff, but that you also go for hikes, you're a hiker. You know what I mean? But the thing that makes someone a hiker is the fact that they go for hikes, just like the thing that makes someone a pilot is the fact that they pilot things. And just like what makes someone a man or what makes someone a woman is that they do man things or they do woman things. That's
right.
I
just want to clarify
the way that we use language, that's
the identity is hugely influential, and that is my point. The identity is a huge factor in what you choose to become and what you do become. So I'm just trying to counter this idea that the identity is not a relevant factor in who we consider to be part of a certain group. If I actually did go on a very easy hike in a park. It's am I not a hiker until I've gotten to a certain elevation? Where there's a sliding scale now, a spectrum. So anyway, that was it. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you so much, Tomris, for a very stimulating conversation.
Yep. Call back.
Yep. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. I'm curious if we operate in society under Tomris's model, if somebody pretending to be a doctor and injecting you full of some low-grade silicone imitation that gets you infected and having to have your legs removed, if you could actually prosecute that person for pretending to be a doctor, for impersonating a doctor, could you get someone in trouble for impersonating a cop by his model if being a cop is merely wearing cop clothes and doing cop things like arresting people? I think it's very obviously an insufficient way to go about categorizing people, but it does work in some instances, like being a hiker or being a fan of I don't know. It's interesting. So fascinating.
It's just can you not acknowledge that it's a factor, but maybe not the only important thing about it? That's the thing is I acknowledge that performance is part of it, and I'm happy to have a very high level intellectual conversation about at what point do you become something cool? That's the example in ContraPoint's video is coolness is something the community confers upon you. What happens if the anime club thinks you're cool, but the Quidditch club doesn't think you're cool? Are you cool? Is that dependent on context? Is it something that's intrinsic about you as a person? Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation. I just think it's so dumb to put it down to only one thing and stick to that, but not when it's inconvenient. Then I'm going to backtrack to biological essentialism. I'm actually still big mad.
I hope we unpack that, because that was a little bit frustrating, and I think kind of exposed the problem with applying that model to gender. But yeah, I do hope he calls back in, because that was a good conversation.
Thank you for watching that clip. If you enjoyed it, perhaps you should join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
At patreon.com/calltheline.